They still talk about that afternoon, the one when a boy no taller than the scorer's table slipped through two defenders and banked in a shot nobody thought would reach the rim. Coach Ramirez, who'd been sweeping rainwater off the old community gym floor, remembers shaking his head, not at the shot, but at the audacity. That kid, barely tall enough to see over the ball rack, moved like the game was made just for him. It hadn't started there. Months before, he'd wandered in with a scuffed basketball that smelled faintly of dust and leather, a hand-me-down from an uncle who once swore he could dunk. His parents weren't sure if this was a phase or a bad idea. "He's too small," the neighbors would say. They weren't wrong. The hoop looked to him like it was hanging in a different time zone, the net swaying in a wind he couldn't feel. On the playground, the other kids picked teams like they were choosing soldiers for war. He was the leftover. Sometimes they let him in out of pity, sometimes not at all. But he kept coming back, watching, learning, tracing patterns in the cracks of the blacktop. At night, he'd watch grainy highlight tapes of Allen Iverson, memorizing crossovers, rewinding until the VHS squeaked. In the gym, Ramirez saw it first. The stubborn tilt of the boy's chin, the way his eyes followed the ball like it was a living thing. "Height's not the game," the coach would mutter under his breath. And on that rainy afternoon, when the kid pulled off that move, everyone else finally saw it too. They didn't know yet that this wasn't the end of a moment. It was the opening note of a much longer song, one that would lead him to a role he didn't even know existed, the architect of the game's rhythm. Coach Darnell swears he saw it happen, the moment the kids stopped just playing and started conducting. It was a muggy July evening in the rec center, the kind of place where the scoreboard flickered and the ceiling fans only pretended to work. The game was chaos, arms everywhere, sneakers screeching, but in the middle of it, the smallest player on the court slowed everything down without saying a word. He pointed once, shifted his stance, and somehow the whole team moved like they'd rehearsed it. The ball zipped twice, the defense split, and a layup dropped in without anyone knowing exactly how. That was the click. Of course, it hadn't happened overnight. The kid had been running two-ball dribble drills on cracked blacktop, chasing the rhythm of bounce-bounce crossover until his palms stung. He'd spend afternoons breaking down pick-and-roll reads on an ancient laptop, pausing clips to guess the next pass before the pros made it. In practice, he ran passing drills until his arms felt like rubber, learning to drop a ball into the exact pocket where only his teammate could grab it. The first time Darnell called him a floor general, the kid didn't know whether to smile or shrug. He began to see the court differently, not as 5 players versus 5, but as a map, each defender just another piece to be moved, like a chess player planning 3 moves ahead, like a band leader cueing brass, percussion, and strings without missing a beat. But there was a price to that control. When a teammate fumbled a perfect pass or blew an open layup, the whispers always curled back toward him. Bad decision, wrong read. He learned early that being the one who holds the steering wheel also means being the one blamed when the car stalls. Still, Darnell says the kid never flinched. Control wasn't optional anymore, it was an instinct. And as summer turned to the start of high school ball, that instinct was about to meet a new kind of court, one with politics, egos, and a spotlight that almost never pointed at him. Ask any ref in the district about that Friday night, and they'll remember the sound. The entire gym inhaling at once when the smallest player on the floor stole the ball from a kid who outweighed him by 50 pounds. It wasn't a flashy dunk or a game winner. It was a defensive read so clean it froze the scoreboard for a second. The crowd didn't even cheer right away. They just looked at each other like, did that just happen? But you don't get to that kind of moment without the backstory. This was a team run by politics as much as playbooks. In the locker room, the ball had an unofficial owner. The star shooting guard scouts circled like vultures. Orders came from the top. Feed him, keep him happy. The point guard knew he could orchestrate a better offense, but high school basketball isn't a meritocracy. It's a popularity contest in sneakers. There were blow-ups too. Once, after a timeout, voices in the huddle got loud enough for the first row to hear. An argument over running yet another isolation set for the star, while the rest of the offense gathered dust. He didn't win that battle, but he picked his spots in the war. And when those spots came, like that night, he took them. A perfectly timed defensive trap. A pass through 2 defenders for an assist that didn't make the highlights, but sealed the game. No chest pounding, no pointing to the name on the jersey. Just a nod from the coach as the bench erupted for someone else. That was his high school story in miniature. Outthink the big guys, keep the machine running, and collect respect in the smallest, quietest currency. Of course, the next level wouldn't be about quiet at all. College ball had a way of turning the volume up until you either adapted or got drowned out. Ask the old team manager about the freshman point guard, and he'll skip right to the night the kid outfoxed a ranked opponent in front of a roaring home crowd. Down 2 with less than a minute left, the ball in his hands, he didn't rush. He lulled the defense with a slow dribble, feinted right, split the gap, and kicked it to the corner for a dagger 3. No chest thumping, no TV pose, just a quick glance at the bench as if to say, "Told you." But that wasn't where his college story started. The first practice nearly broke him. The pace was relentless, the collisions sharper, the margin for error microscopic. A half-second hesitation and the ball was gone. Passes that used to thread through defenders in high school were now swallowed whole by wingspans that seemed to stretch across half the court. He adapted. Trick plays slipped into the playbook, tempo changes that made defenders stumble. The old 2-dribble pull-up turned into a hesitation that froze a shot blocker just long enough. He built a quiet rapport with the head coach, short talks in the hallway, quick notes during film sessions. The one piece of advice that stuck: don't let the game control you, you control the game. Still, college had a way of humbling everyone. Mid-season, he found himself on the bench, replaced by a younger guard with flashier hops. For a week, he sat there, towel over his shoulders, face unreadable. But the practices told a different story, staying late, running sets with the scout team, studying film until the custodian flicked the lights. When his number was called again, he was ready, sliding back into the lineup not with noise, but with the steady hands of someone who'd already survived this dance. The manager shakes his head when he tells it, because the kid made it look easy, and nothing about college ball is easy. But the grind was catching up. You could see it in the way he wrapped his knees after games, the ice packs that stayed on longer each week. The next chapter wasn't going to be about proving he belonged. It was going to be about lasting long enough to keep the game in his hands. The trainer remembers the look on his face that night, not after a win, but after watching a freshman hit the game winner he'd set up in the huddle. The rookie had followed his exact advice, even down to the footwork, and when the shot dropped, the kid sprinted straight to him on the sideline. No cameras caught it, but the hug said everything. The torch had been passed. It hadn't started in triumph, though. The first real crack came in January, a bad landing, a twist, and suddenly, he was in the trainer's room instead of on the court. The diagnosis was a mild ligament tear. Not career-ending, but enough to change the way he moved. The rehab was long and lonely. While the rest of the team ran drills, he was in the corner, ankle-wrapped, working resistance bands and listening to the echo of sneakers on hardwood. When he came back, speed was no longer his sharpest blade. He learned to carve defenses with angles instead of bursts, to use his body as a shield and his eyes as a weapon. The game slowed for him in a way it hadn't before, not because he wanted it to, but because it had to. Somewhere along the way, he became the guy the younger players gravitated toward. He'd pull a rookie aside, break down the finer points of a pick and roll, or explain how to manipulate tempo without anyone noticing. It was never about sounding like a coach. It was about making sure the kid didn't make the same mistakes he had. By the time that rookie hit the big shot, he'd already accepted the shift. He wasn't the fastest or the first option anymore. But he'd learned something the rest of them hadn't yet. The game is bigger than minutes and stat lines. The trainer says that's the funny thing about decline. You can lose a step and still gain ground if you know where to look. And as the season wore on, it was clear his final chapters wouldn't be written with highlight reels, but with fingerprints left on players who didn't even know they were carrying his legacy forward. At the reunion dinner, someone pulled out an old group photo, and that's when Marcus spoke up. "You know," he said, pointing at the man in the middle, "none of you would have played the same without him." It wasn't a toast, just a quiet truth dropped into the hum of conversation. A few nodded. One former coach raised his glass. "The last time I saw him play, it wasn't even in a real game. It was a charity scrimmage, years after his last season. The crowd was thin, the scoreboard dark, but there he was, feeding a teenager perfect passes and warm-ups. The kid, nervous, wide-eyed, kept looking over after each bucket, the same way we used to. That kind of influence doesn't happen by accident. Back in school, I'd walk past the gym late at night and see him alone under a single buzzing light. Not working on some flashy move, just running the same set again and again until it was invisible in its perfection. He knew his worth wasn't tied to headlines or scouts. It was written in the way the team moved when he was on the floor. The rest of us only realized it later. A message from an old coach, a handshake from a former fan, the little rituals he left behind, extra film study, the first and last out work ethic, the calm in huddles when things went sideways. They stayed with the program long after he was gone. And here's the thing. What he learned on the court followed him everywhere else. Reading a room like reading a defense. keeping a meeting on tempo the way he used to control a quarter, handling family chaos the way he handled a full-court press. He used to say, "Control beats chaos." I saw it again last month, our old team's new point guard, barely 20, slowing the game in the final minutes and winning it the way he would have. No one mentioned the connection, but I knew. The game had moved on, but his rhythm was still in it. And maybe that's the point: you don't always get to see your name in lights. But if you've done it right, the light you left keeps shining.